Hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and I couldn't wait because we are on episode 28 of Monster. I have wanted to call the last several episodes episode 28, and I don't know why. I labeled, like when I was editing, I labeled episode 26, 28, 27, 28. I just really, my subconscious has wanted to get here for a long time, apparently. And I can't imagine why, because we just had Karl come together with, the show says Schubert, but I'm going to talk about that, with old Hans, who is his biological father, and they've reconnected and they've acknowledged that they're father and son, but Karl has said he's going to be adopted by his foster parents, so how's that going to go now? And Hans has just happened to hire Johan as his personal secretary. How convenient. So there's lots of things going on, but I'm really excited, not only because we're finally at episode 28, but also because I was on Discord and we were talking about about manga panels, and someone had asked where I was in the manga, and I'm like, well, I've got the first 2 volumes of the manga, but I haven't bought the 3rd volume yet because I wasn't sure where it ended. And the person on the Discord was like, oh, well, I think that the episode you just reacted to, which was episode 26, that's where the last volume 3 ended. And I was like, oh, so ta-da! I'm very, very fortunate. I am very fortunate because I was able to get onto a book retailer very quickly. They had said, the person I was talking to on the Discord was like, volume 3 can be hard to find. Like, it goes out of print really quickly. And I was like, ugh. So I saw this and I nabbed it. I was like, okay, I know that I've already read the anime through this. I'm going to go ahead and get it. And yeah, so I've spent today reading through it, and it's great. The cover is Tenma and Johan, and obviously there's Johan approaching Lottie and Karl. But what's interesting is there's a little boy with it's like a Jack and the Beanstalk kind of thing. It looks like Jack and the Beanstalk. It's at Grapevines. Maybe it's meant to be, it almost feels like it's meant to be Johan, but it doesn't quite look like Johan. But then there's a praying mantis that's in the corner of it. So it's interesting imagery of the fairy tale Jack and the Beanstalk, but with grapes and a praying mantis. Interestingly enough. And then that is the image from the last volume, volume 2, right? So Tenma is on the cover of this one. Looks very good. I read through it, and there's not too much that's different from the actual anime. The anime, it's pretty cut and dry. There were a couple things I did want to show you all that I thought were rather interesting. The one was, I really liked the panel where Tenma tells Rudy that he cheated, and I just love that panel there where he's just saying, I was cheating too, and my hand is over it. But yeah, like that panel there, that one, Tenma's little smiley face, it's really good. There's also like little details through here. I forget just how much we've gone through, so many events in the last several episodes. Like this volume covers Rudy. Remember Rudy? That seems like a lifetime ago. I was like, what the heck? So Rudy, the couple with the kid that's in prison, remember that episode? That seems like a while back. And then not only that, but Mueller, Nina, remember her? I feel like we've been on Karl and Lottie and Johan for so long, I forgot what all we've been doing. Roberto, the one thing I noticed about Roberto in the manga is that, and I can't remember if this is the anime or not, but Mueller tells Nina that Roberto's from a country that no longer exists, which is fascinating to me. So I'm wondering if Johan was able to lure Roberto to his side because he's from like Czechoslovakia. So maybe Johan was able to use his words to talk about the country that no longer exists and get Roberto swayed. I don't know. But in any case, as far as the other things, Lunge? Remember him? The whole thing with Lunge? I thought, I do like Lunge's expression here in the corner where he's like telling the woman to look out for Tenma. Like it's very fake. And when we've seen Lunge before, he seemed very like robotic almost. And here there's a bit of conniving in the manga with his facial expressions, which is interesting. There's also some really dynamic shots of Lunge. The shot of Lunge in the shadows is quite creepy, right? Very creepy indeed. And then the shot of him getting stabbed is like its own giant page spread. It's great. But yeah, so then, and then after that we have Eva. All the things happening in this volume. We have Eva, and her chapters are really well, they were really well adapted in the anime. I thought that they were pretty like tit for tat everything was pretty nice. And then, let me find on here. After that, we start the whole thing with Johan. It's such a weird cut because you have the scene right after Timma saves her, and they have the dinner scene. You have on the dinner scene on one page, and then we immediately start Karl's storyline on the next page without like a break or any transition. It just happens. It's so fascinating. But the one thing from the story, aside from the really cool color pages that you get of the story with Karl and his mom and Lottie and them, they're really nice. The one thing I do want to note is that in this part of the manga, Johan's hair is super curly. Like in the anime, they make it kind of straight almost, but in the manga, it has a kind of like a floofiness to it. Has like a little wave to it. You can see down there kind of like that. And the hair that Johan has, it makes him look even more dorky and innocent, which makes it all the more deceptive, right? It doesn't make him look so much like a smooth, suave villain, so much as just like a kind of dorky guy. Like it's just floofy. So I thought the fluffy hair was a very interesting addition in the manga. And then the manga volume ends off with Richard asking the fake Margot who was the boy that was with Edmund, which we know is most likely Johan. So the ending of episode 26 is basically the ending of this. So interesting. But yeah, really glad I have volume 3. I think there's 9 volumes altogether, so not halfway yet, but definitely a third of the way through, right? So yeah, I speaking of which, I want to give a quick shout out to our philanthropy tier over on Patreon, because y'all helped me buy this volume so I can talk to you all about it. The philanthropy tier on Patreon are just those people who donate extra time and money each month to help me do the things that I love, and I'm super appreciative of it. If you check out my Patreon, I've got 3 tiers over there, but the philanthropy tier, I want to give a special shout out to these people who've helped really make my day and make my month with these reactions, and that is Edgar, Dana, Anime Annie, Nameless Monster, Kenny, Arjo, Tyrone, as well as Truck, Shimoyama, Be Happy, Translucent Men, Eric, and Sunspots. Thank you all so much for all the support that you give me. I am so grateful, and I can't thank you all enough. But all of my love, thank you. So let's dive in, right? I don't know at this point with Johan being the secretary for Hans now. Oh, the other thing I was going to say is that we talked about the last reaction of how to say, is it Schubert or Schuvald? Interestingly enough, in the anime, I am very certain that they say Schubert. You can hear them say Schubert. But in the actual manga itself, the name is Schuwald. It's Schuwald, Schuwald. Schuwald, swallowed it whole. So that's so fascinating that the anime, you can listen to anime and they say Schubert, and then the manga says Schuwald. So I guess if I call them both names throughout this, you'll understand why. But I theorized last episode what I think was going to happen with Johan and Karl, and now we're going to see if it goes down. So I'm pretty excited about that, y'all. I hope you all are too, but we're not going to waste any more time. We are going to start episode 28 of Monster, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and I'm going to check my volume, get all that good, and let's go. Oh my gosh. So I've been wondering this entire arc when it's all gonna when the shit's gonna hit the fan, right? Because not that I've not minded Karl and Lottie and Johan. It's been an amazing arc, and getting all this information on Johan, complicating our views of him and how we think about him and how others think about him, and just seeing how so easily he can manipulate others. It's been great, and meeting Richard as a character has been great. But the whole time, throughout this entire arc, I've been sitting there going, so when are we going to connect it to something? That's been what I've been wondering the whole time. In the back of my mind, I've been well, this is really cool, but how is Tenma going to fit into this? Where is this going? Is Tenma going to show up and Karl's going to be dead and Schubert's going to be dead and that's going to be the end of it, and we, the audience, will know what all's gone down, but Tenma won't know? I've been wondering this whole time, how is it all connected? And then this episode, it all gets connected. And I was like, oh my God. So, oh. How does it all work? So Whiteboard Coon had to come out. Whiteboard Coon had to come out because we got to connect all these things together because holy cow, we've got things happening and it's kind of insane, right? Oh my gosh, like and this episode was scary. I was like, I don't like horror movies because I'm easily scared. And the whole time when he was like going into the shadows or looking across, that whole looking across your bedroom window and seeing something you think you see in the shadows, like I do that all the time and it freaks me out. And I'm like, this is the last thing I need to see. I'm like watching this at night. I'm like, why? I'm gonna like have a flashlight everywhere I go to in my home. But yeah, what the fudge? So yeah, the idea throughout all of this that all of these things are connected and Johan may have been playing a much longer con than we thought going into this case. Oh my gosh, like everything. And Johan is trying to get Richard killed. I'm convinced that Johan, the moment he saw Richard in that house, was like, you got to go. You're going to figure this out. Like there's something connecting. It's like, oh, what is this? Ah! So we need to go through this episode and just use Whiteboard Coon and write down what's going on. Because yeah, I really come to like Richard's character in this story. I like Richard's character. He's very flawed, but he's very much like the opposite of Lunge, right? He's kind of like the opposite of Lunge. I guess I'll put over here talking about Richard. Richard versus Lunge. And you could argue there are some similarities there. Like, for example, they both kind of obsess over cases. And we've kind of seen how that obsession can become something detrimental. So like in Richard's case, it led to alcoholism. And here it's led to an unhealthy obsession with Tenma, right? And what's interesting though with the two of them is that with Richard, he does have a love and desire to connect to his daughter, to his family. Whereas Lunge seems like he has no want of connection. Lunge really doesn't care about his family that much. He's solely devoted to his job. Whereas Richard, he's trying to keep up, good appearances and keep up on the straight and narrow to see his family. So they're very different in this cases. Also, Lunge he chases his own agenda. Whereas Richard seems like has this justice to find truths. Whereas Lunge wants to just chase after the little T truth he has created, Richard seems to be aiming more towards like big capital T truths. Like, let's get down to the bottom of this, find the meaning of it all, how does it all connect, which is leading this whole thing with Johan that is just absolutely fascinating. But I've become really obsessed myself with Richard's character. I like Richard's character. I want him to reconnect with his daughter. I'm rooting for him. I really like how he approaches cases. He has like he has a very old school noir approach. It's funny because you have Richard and you have Lunge, and Lunge kind of has that like eccentric Sherlock Holmes quality to him, but it also feels very like modern day BBC Sherlock, where he's like doing the finger thing, like taking notes. Whereas Richard has a very like Casablanca, old school noir type of detective work. It's rather interesting, right? But I like Richard's character a lot. And he's trying to figure out why the investigation is over. He's like, but we're looking into the people that murdered your reader. Shouldn't we keep trying to find that out? And what's funny is that at this point, Schubert's like, nah, I'm pretty good. We can just kind of abandon it. We're fine. That's the end of it, right? He says that's the end of it. So we need to put down like all the case connections here. I'm wondering if Johan, catching wind about Richard, wanted to get Richard off the case. And maybe we talked last episode about why Johan would let Karl and Schubert reunite. especially with these cases if the goal was to like isolate Schubert. Well, my theory now gets a little more complicated because I think the thing is that there's no clean way right now to get rid of Karl. I think that the more that Johan learned about Karl and how he's actually Schubert's son and how he has the connection and how he's tied to the university and how he's tied to Johan now, I think Johan realized I can't just simply get rid of Karl. That will look too suspicious. Two readers of Schubert dying within a short period of time seems too suspicious, and they're related, whereas all these other cases to isolate Schubert have not been related. So it's been very easy to cover them up because they don't really have any connection except for the Schubert and the weird-ass forest that we'll talk about on Whiteboard Coon. So I think Johan realized, he's like, I can't just kill Karl. Too suspicious, too connected, too easy to trace back. There's too many factors that are likewise. It's not like my other cases. It won't look good. So Karl has to stick around. Karl's not going anywhere because it's clear that he's obsessed with his dad. So Johan kind of says, okay, fine. If I can't, it's not the if you can't beat him, join him mentality, but it's like if I can't kill this guy, then I'll, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. He's like, I'll just keep him around as close as I can to watch over him, make sure he's not onto me, and I can manipulate Schubert while Karl kind of ends up assisting me in keeping Schubert happy. So yeah, so in this case, we're going to put Karl down here. Karl and Schubert are united. And then we have in the wings here, Johan is the personal secretary. And that's where we're at with that. So, okay, fair enough. And yeah, I don't blame Richard for being like, well, why are we just calling off the case? Shouldn't we still try to find this murderer of, I get that this kid's your son. Glad you discovered him. But shouldn't we be finding out who murdered Edmund Farron? Shouldn't we find him out? That case is still not settled yet. And he's like, no, it's fine. And it seems rather interesting that all of these cold cases had somehow involved Schubert, and Richard kept getting turned down at each one. Each one kept getting shut down. And now I wonder if he was getting close to making a connection, and at that point the case just went cold, like this one is, right? Everything just got dropped and nothing was going to be touched back on again. So who knows? And then yeah, Karl shows up to get his dad, and he's like, just send me the bill. And then he's like, the weather's nice. And he's like, oh, Johan's here too. And he's like, oh, Johan's here, huh? And that's when Richard's like, wow, this icy, untrustworthy man changes his tune with Johan involved. Yeah, and I love that callback when we eventually see, when we go back to that scene, we do find out that Richard did see him there. Oh, that's so good. It's so good. The show just not revealing, right? But yeah, so what's funny is the vampire of Bayern. Yeah. So at first this paints Johan in a good light. Because, yeah, you leave the episode till the intro starts. You leave it going, oh, well. So, yeah, it's so fascinating because when you end right before the intro, the OP, you end the episode introduction feeling like, oh, well, Johan's a pretty nice guy. He got this old icy man to come out of his shell and warm up. He can't be all that bad. Maybe we've been thinking wrong about Johan this entire time. And then the rest of the episode happens, and you start to see how all these cases are connected, and the connecting factor is not only Schubert, but Johan. And I don't think that's a coincidence, right? So the episode has let the last few episodes kind of lull us into this weird state of confusion of being like, should we view Johan as a bad guy? Should we view Johan as an antagonist? And then this episode goes, yes, you should, and you should probably be terrified of him. And it's like, there are reasons you should probably be worried about Johan right now. Just saying. And so yeah, then we start the OP. All right. So I'll go to this dinner scene between the counselor and Richard. And I do feel bad for Richard because I'm like, the counselor orders a glass of wine, the therapist does, and it's kind of like, that kind of sucks because you're like going, man, he's like a recovering alcoholic and you're drinking right in front of him. Could you not just have tea for dinner? I don't know. I think I would feel like, it's not that I wouldn't feel uncomfortable drinking in front of friends that don't drink, because I have friends that don't drink. And I've drank with them before and they've had like tea or water, but they weren't like at the early stages of recovery. And so I don't know. I feel like as their like mentor and counselor, it's one of those things where I don't know if I personally would drink in front of them, but then, you know, in the guy's defense, it's part of Richard's step forward is, can you be in a social environment and drink in front of people who are drinking, or avoid drinking in front of those that are drinking alcohol? So I guess it's fine. It's just, it kind of sucks for Richard because, you know, it's temptation. Although whiskey seems to be a temptation more than wine. And so he just has the water. And he's like, oh, I'm doing these silly things by flipping through scrapbooks I made when I was a detective. All my unsolved cases. It's fascinating that Richard is kind of like the detective that got all of these unsolved cases. Isn't that weird? That almost feels like fate that he was able to find all these cases. If it comes out that like Johan's planned Richard to be the one to find all these cases, I don't know how I'm going to handle that. That's going to be too much. But they were all like cold cases he could never solve. And it's so easy to feel how he's frustrated. He's like, there's all these homicides that I never got the chance to solve. And so the victims have gone like without retribution, without any kind of, you know, anything bringing to light the perpetrators of their crime. He's like, it's my lack of ability that I'm frustrated with. He's like, I haven't been able to do what I set out to do, and it's frustrating. And the counselor says, you have the ability. You tried hard, but you became too attached. And that attachment led to your frustration, leading to drinking. So there's this idea that he became too attached, and it led him to drink. Which kind of like obsessed over cases, like Lungate, yeah. So that attachment became too much for him because he could never find a lead to connect them together. And so they get their food, and he's like, I don't think the scrapbook's a bad thing. He's like, you're fine now. He's like, I want you to look over the cases and tell me what you think about them now. He's like, maybe it'll be a good thing now that you're in a better place to go over those cases and see what does that make you think. And so he's like, okay. And so he talks about, you know, how the boy that was a serial killer that he killed, it still haunts him. Like, it's still something that brings him, like, to a point where he can't move forward. And he tells the counselor, yes, that's the case. And he says, when everything is clear and when it comes into broad daylight, the ghost will go away too. So basically the counselor's saying is like, once you realize your issue, once you bring it to light, it won't be an issue anymore. So you just need to figure out, why are you so hyper fixated on the boy? And then there's so many freaky things. Okay, so let's keep a counter of the freaky things that happen to Richard in this episode. One is the train. He has the vision at the train. And it keeps being of the boy aiming the gun at him. Like, it keeps being that. So he sees that. That part was freaky. Then there is the shot in the window at his house. There's the actual beam on the building. Then things go from being like visions and illusions to being freaking real and terrifying. Like, you had the beam building and the truck trying to hit him. Like, and even the crowd around, it's like, man, it looked like that was purposeful. No, I think Johan's trying to off him and get him out because he's learning too much. He's figuring out too much, right? It's all coming to light. Everything's starting to come full circle. The idea that he saw evil in the boy. He saw true evil. It's like he saw the monster. The monster came out and Richard experienced it. He saw what it looked like. Mm-hmm. So, okay, we have these different cases. We have the Holmar the accountant, okay? So we'll put him here. Holmar the accountant. And all of these are within the span of 4 years. So even though it doesn't seem like a long amount of time in comparison to how long this story has been so far, that's a long con to get Schubert isolated. That's a lot of time. So Holmar the accountant, the victim, had been steadily building up his career. Didn't seem like he had any enemies. There's no indication of a robbery. Then we have the voice of God, right? Which was a driver and an ex-housekeeper. So the voice of God is interesting. That's the point I realized, oh my God, Johan's involved with these. So you have the ex-housekeeper and the driver, both of Schubert, right? That the driver of Schubert, all of that happening. And then at both crime scenes, there was a mysterious message proclaiming the killer had heard the voice of God that was written on the wall. Ich habe die Stimme Gottes gehört. So, we have the killer wrote on wall about hearing the voice of God. Which could tie to Johan, okay? Maybe, maybe not. It's just, Johan's calling card is writing messages on walls and surfaces, so seems to be a little interesting. And then the Dorna company CEO. So Dorna Co. CEO. We've got them, the homicide of that person. The one leading investigators in Bayern Rudo and one of the leading investigators was found dead in the Harteholz forest. Okay, so we have that one of the investigators in Bayern, which was Ruto Gakushi, was found dead in Harteholz forest. Don't go into that damn forest, right? What the hell? That's a bit terrifying. So what do we do with that information? And then he's like, wait a minute. He's like, the Spira's homicide, which is a middle-aged couple drowned and found upstream in the Isar River. So we have the Spira. There's too many. We have the Spira homicide. And they were a middle-aged couple that was drowned. So yeah, all these cases on the surface, no one in them seems to be related. They're all at different events, different times. They all seem completely unconnected. The case was grouped with the serial homicides of middle-aged couples. So it's considered to be connected to the serial couples murders with Tinma. This is how we get Tinma involved. Tinma is involved through the Spira homicide. All right? That's how we're going to get him connected to all of this. The primary suspect is a Japanese doctor that's still on the run. And then he's like, I started drinking more as the number of unsolved cases grew, but now that I'm sober, it's like I can think on a sober head, and it's a completely different experience. This is what it's like to think while sober. And so that's kind of the thing that's interesting, is that Richard, he's able to deduce better without the demons of liquor, like, kind of, invading him. So fascinating. But yeah, I'm going to skip over the really scary window part, because that part was scary. I didn't like it. Not at all. I'd be freaked out too. And he says, you saw a flash of insight that disappeared when you saw the young boy's ghost. He's like, don't be impatient. It'll come back to you. And I'm like, dude, I'd carry a flashlight around or something, because running through those hallways and hearing people, hearing footsteps and trying to freak him out, that part was so scary. And then seeing the guy aim the gun at him in the alleyway and just looking completely disturbed. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, he goes to counsel in the middle of the night and is like, I've got to tell you, I found out what it was. He's like, that time I saw in the young boy, I realized it did exist in this world. True evil. So yeah, the idea that he's like, that's why I shot him dead. So here's the crazy thing, is that true evil led him to kill the boy. The monster that was inside of the boy that burst out is what he saw and why he realized he had to act. So what's interesting is we have Richard, who was able to pull the trigger. He did shoot the boy and kill him. Now we have Tinma, who claims that he's going to do the same thing to Johan when he sees him. But is he? Is he going to be able to do what Richard did and pull that trigger or not? I don't think that Tinma's going to pull the trigger. I really don't. But I don't know. We don't know if that's going to happen. That's just, we're not there yet, right? And he's like, the flash of insight, one of the many unsolved cases that bothered me. He says there was just one case. He's like, the one case was the problem. And then we go back to it. So we come to find out that Dr. Gillen, which is Rudy, is connected to the psychologist that's working with Richard. So there's a connection there. His counselor was a teacher to Rudy and Tinma. It's a small world after all. Like everybody in Germany that has any type of psychology background, they all know each other. But he writes him to ask about Peter Jurgens and about the friend that he had trying to figure things out. And so as he's looking back through, we do see Jürgen Wolf, which is someone in there. I'm trying to see if any of these names look like they would matter. And then we have Kenzo Tinma. He looks so young there. He has like the fresh youth face there. I thought we were going to like cut to him, but we're not ready to see Tinma yet. No. I am a little bit worried because Richard seems to be connecting a lot of dots and he's seen Johan. It's like death flags out for Richard because I'm like, is somebody going to try to kill him now that he's figuring everything out? Is Tinma going to be able to talk to Richard and get the full scoop before he's killed? I don't know. I feel like Richard's going to like crack the code, figure out the case, figure out how Johan's involved, figure out that he's doing something, and then at the last second before Tinma can meet up with Richard, he's going to die. I don't want Richard to die, but I'm not, just that thought is just invading my brain. I'm like, oh, I don't know how I feel about that. And so he goes and asks the woman to talk about her mom for the Voice of God homicide. And honestly, what's so realistic about this moment is that the daughter, it's not like she's overwhelmed or like too sad to talk about it, but she's almost frustrated the police gave up. They're like, they didn't put any effort into the investigation anymore. So of course I'll talk to somebody who is willing to listen earnestly about the situation. And so that's how we get the connection that the ex-housekeeper was with Schubert and the driver was with Schubert. So we find out that not only was she the housekeeper, but that was like 20, she says it was 20 years ago. So we need to write this down. 20 years ago, which does bring in some weirdness, right? So she knew Schubert, but it was from like 2 decades ago. And these murders didn't happen but a few years ago as well. And the thing of it is, she had a really good relationship with Schubert. They were besties. They read poetry together. The driver seemed to have a good relationship, and that was from 30 years ago. So it almost seems like Johan tracked down all the people who had any connection with Schubert and could possibly be in line for the inheritance and was like, nope, bye. Because, yeah, like she got along with Schubert. He could have entrusted the money to her. He got along with the taxi cab driver. Who knows? Or not the taxi cab, but the driver of his vehicle. The CEO and the accountant, they both had a stake in the company and the shares, I'm sure. Got rid of them. So, yeah, it's fascinating, right? She said they got along great. And these poetry books, like the whole shelf full, are all ones given to my mom. So Richard's like, okay. So the ex-housekeeper had a good relationship with Schubert, enough so that he gave her like all the books. So she clearly had a stake in all this, but what's the deal? And then with the CEO, who would have thought a detective that investigated the Dorna CEO homicide would become a private investigator? And he's like, I want to ask you some questions again regarding the people who hated the CEO. And he's like, the CEO's enemies, there was an endless number of them. So we find out the endless CEO had lots of enemies, making it hard to pin down on Johan specifically. The police should have finished analysis of the list of companies that went bankrupt because of CEO Gawk. Okay, so he's like, what's your relationship? He's like, are you talking about Mr. Schubert? Says they were two lifelong rivals. So he was Schubert's rival and friend. Gotta go! Because if they're the rival, it seems like the people that had positive relationships with Schubert, they had to go because they were possibly going to get in the way of whatever Johan's plan is, and he wants to be extremely thorough. And so we find out that Schubert went twice bankrupt. Went bankrupt twice in the past, which makes sense because he's gone to the forest twice in the past. It was a result of the competition with the CEO. He's like, they met at a party, there'd be a big ruckus. And he said they were ones who could argue with each other on par. Rather than being rivals, they were actually friends. And then he says that they would go bird watching, right? Didn't he say they'd go bird watching? I'm pretty sure that they would go bird watching together. And so then, Richard just needs to not walk in front of this building ever again. The building with the beam and stuff. I'm like, they have all that construction. It's a shadowy, dark building of destruction. Like just stay away from it. Just don't get near it. Stop it. Because, yeah, that thing almost falls on him. So then we find Hans the driver. And he's like, that was 30 years ago. And he says he was fired because Schubert went bankrupt around then. So the driver was fired when he went bankrupt the first time. And maybe 20 years ago, this was around the second time that it went bankrupt. And the whole CEO thing was trying to prevent a third time. And what does he say here? He says, I'm telling you this. He was a good guy who could get along with anybody, be it rich or poor people. He taught the rich guy how to enjoy bird watching. So the driver supposedly taught Schubert about bird watching that he ended up liking. Now, whatever the hell this whole bird watching thing is, this like gets to be a point of contention. He says that when he took him to the forest, he'd be as happy as a kid. So Schubert, like the forest was his happy place. Which Johan talked about a few episodes ago, that everybody has that place they really relax in. But the fact that a detective was found dead there in that forest, supposedly investigating all of this, does not give me the warm fuzzies at all. It makes me so suspicious. Okay, and then 2 years ago was the death of the accountant. Okay, so we're connecting all these things together, right? He was serious. Nobody had any reason to dislike him. But he was in an orphanage. What do we get there? And was raised by several foster parents. Okay. Get on here. So yeah, he was an orphan with foster parents. And happened to work for Schubert as his accountant. But his past seemed a little bit similar to Johan. Johan's like, we can't have that. Can't have somebody that's similar to me. No. He finally became an accountant. And then it said he was asked by Schubert to be his personal accountant many times. Why did he turn him down, though? She said, yes, many times, but he refused him every time, though. It was never the fact that he was busy with what was in his job. He said their philosophies on money were different. So he turned down, okay, he knew Schubert, but turned down because of a philosophical difference. Fair enough. Didn't want to work for him because, you know, they didn't handle money the same way. But then he says the wife, she talks about he was so strict with money. So, making it sound like Schubert might have had a spending issue. I mean, hiring 5 different kids to read Latin for you every week. I mean, granted, he's probably not paying very much, but that's still, like, interesting. He's like, the perpetrator will definitely be caught. How do you know your husband and Mr. Schubert met? They met in the forest. Back when he could see, they run across each other in the forest. They were bird watching. After that, he would go with Mr. Schubert many times. That's so creepy. That's so creepy that the driver introduced him to bird watching and they would meet in the forest bird watching. There's some weird connections here, right? Things are getting freaky. I don't know what to think about it. And then, yeah, Richard almost he's like, they are poetry to each other. They read together. And then he nearly gets hit by the car. It seems they were targeting you. And so he goes up there and says that all of these cases are connected. They seem unrelated. None of the records would point to them being along the same time, but they're all there to isolate. All the murders are isolating. Like, you have the accountant that was connected to him, the housekeeper, the driver, the CEO, all these people that had positive connections with Schubert. Suddenly, they were gone, and Schubert was left alone, isolated, and became kind of a curmudgeon. That all seems like by design by Johan, right? And so they talk about how they're all connected, and then that's when the counselor says, a former student of mine mentioned the same name that Tim did in his interrogation. He researched a killer who murdered because a friend ordered him to, and the friend's name was Johan. And yeah, granted, it is a common name. Super common. It would be very hard to have substantial proof that it was. But the fact that the same name keeps cropping up is a little bit suspicious, right? It means someone named Johan has committed these murders in the span of 4 years to completely isolate Mr. Schubert. And I'm so glad that Richard realizes who it is. I'm so glad. I was afraid that Richard would be like, Johan, where have I heard that name before? And I'd be like, you have heard it. So, in 4 years, the idea has been to isolate Schubert. Now, to what end? To take his money? Maybe. To, like, do a really cruel experiment? Who knows? It's Johan. At this point, we can't determine anything about him. But the idea is that he has been isolated over time. And that's when Margot Langer, who gave birth to Schubert's son, what does it say? What does it say there? And the prostitute also conveniently died. And the student who claimed he was Schubert's son committed suicide once the real son appeared. So yeah, Edmund, the whole thing with him, Edmund and Margot, all connected. Funny that. And he's like, where is Johan now if he exists? And that's when Richard makes the connection and he sees him. Oh my God. He's right beside Mr. Schubert. He's been there the whole time. Oh my God. I gotta take a picture of Johan there. There he is. Oh, ridiculous, y'all. He's been right beside him. That moment where he like turns the corner and Johan's standing right there is the creepiest thing. I just, yeah, we spent the last several episodes, like, the author has made us question that, Johan seems like a nice guy. He seems fine. What could he possibly be doing? I mean, let's be real. And then we see all these murder cases that are all slowly being connected, and Johan's the common denominator in all of them. What do we do with that? What do we do with that? So, yeah. Yep. I'm so excited. I thought originally this case was gonna be like a two-parter, like 2 episodes. We're gonna go back to Tenma. Then it was 3 episodes. Now it's 4 episodes, and I'm just so excited. There's no way I can wait to watch the next episode. I'm sorry, but we have to watch the next one. It just has to happen. So yeah, I'm really excited, y'all. I hope you all are too. I'm probably not going to wait on the next episode. I'll probably wait till after I get comments on episode 27. But after that, all bets are off because I'm fearful for Richard because I want Richard to be okay. But I feel like if Johan gets the slightest bit threatened or thinks that you're cracking the code, he's going to try to off you. And he's tried to get rid of Richard. So I'm afraid that Tenma is not going to... my biggest fear is that Richard's going to crack the code... And then Tenma's gonna like meet him, and before he can explain to Tenma everything he's found out, he's gonna die. And I'm gonna be like, are you freaking kidding me? So I'm like, come on, Richard. I'm rooting for you. But I don't know if he's gonna make it. And if Tenma even sees him? We don't know where Tenma is. So we know he's on his way to Munich, but oh my gosh. So yeah. I'm pretty excited, y'all. I hope y'all are too, but I am really, really gung-ho now for the series. The roller coaster is on, and I can't wait. So I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'm going to be back very soon with episode 29 of Monster. Bye.